to your long paper questions, do the same thing. Watch this video. Pause it where you need to. I will tell you where a lot of people went wrong, explain to you the questions, and then you can go through them, make sure you understand your corrections. Okay, so let's go straight into it. So here we go. Right, question 1 was learning. If you got this question wrong, it's because you did not study. There is no two ways about that, okay? So I cannot help you there. You have to look at this graph, which we have done. Learn, learn, learn. Pay attention in class when we're going through it, but otherwise, this was all just rote learning, okay? Ethanoic acid is a colorless liquid at room temperature, okay? It has typical acid properties, so you should be thinking acid plus base, acid plus this, acid plus that, okay? And it forms compounds called ethanoates. That's just a little bit of information you might not need to know, but they're giving it to you, read it. A pure sample of ethanoic acid is slowly heated, okay, from 0 to 150. And we get this graph at the bottom. So straight away from 0 to 150, they have told you that. They've given you the temperatures, okay? Straight away, when you get this graph, you should write melting, okay? This would be a solid. I'm just going to put S. This would be a liquid here, boiling to get your gas. Okay? Simple, easy. That's what you should have done. So that when you get to the questions, name the change that occurs between D and E. Naming it, guys. A lot of you were putting liquid slash gas. That's not a name. A liquid slash a gas. The name is, what is it doing? Between D and E, it is boiling. Okay, that was a really easy 1-mark question and lots of people got that wrong. Okay, it's boiling between D and E. What is it doing? Name the change. Change of state, boiling. Okay, what would be the difference between B and C if an impure sample had been used? Okay, the difference would be it would not be a straight line. Okay, remember, an impure substance makes it melt and boil over a range of temperatures. So it's not a straight line. Okay, 1 mark, super simple. Not that it would melt at a lower temperature. What would be the difference between the region B and C? Okay, not would it be higher or lower. They're asking you what would be the difference between the straight line. The difference is that it would not be a straight line because it's an impure sample. Okay. Complete the following table to compare the separation and movement of the molecules in the regions C to D and E to F. So C to D is a liquid, E to F is a gas. Okay, so here we are looking at a liquid, here we are looking at a gas. Okay, so the separation in a liquid, okay, they are still close together. Okay, remember your molecules are still close. You could have even said that they do touch. Okay, in a gas, they are far apart. Okay, again, this was all just learning, guys. Okay, you just had to learn what are the molecules doing in a liquid, what are they doing in a gas, what are they doing in a solid. Okay, the movement of particles, fast and random. Okay, they move randomly. You know this about a gas already. Okay, can the particles move to fill any volume? No, a liquid will only take the shape of its container. Gas, yes. Okay, a gas, if I let gas go in a room, it's going to fill the entire room. Okay, if I let liquid go in a room, it's just going to fill the floor. That's not the whole volume of the room. Okay, unless I fill the whole room with liquid. Okay, so you got 1 mark for each of these things. Okay, you had to figure out that C to D was a liquid and E to F was a gas. And again, that was just learning. Okay. Right, question B. Complete the word equations for the reaction of ethanoic acid. Okay, now a little bit tricky here, but they told you that right at the beginning, they told you that you form these compounds, ethanoates. Okay, so here we have a metal and an acid. So you will get a salt, which will be calcium ethanoate. Okay, they told you that in the question. You had to read the question, plus it's here. Okay, so you'll get calcium ethanoate, and if it's a metal and an acid, you get salt and hydrogen. Okay, now we changed this question to be out of 3 marks. So you got 1 for calcium ethanoate, 1 for hydrogen. Here, all you had to do was figure out what metal you were using, and you were using zinc. Okay, and you got another mark for zinc. So that was out of a total of 3, not 2. Okay, write the symbol equation for the reaction between ethanoic acid and sodium hydroxide. Okay, this was slightly mean because you had to know that ethanoic acid looks like this, CH3COOH. Okay, how do you know that? We've actually done ethanoic acid before when we did acids. Okay, so you had to really have learned your notes. Okay, plus sodium hydroxide, which is a base. So we have an acid and a base, okay, which gives water. Acid plus base gives me salt plus water. Okay, the way you work out your salt, the sodium takes the place of the hydrogen. So your salt looks like this, CH3, COO, and then instead of the H, you now have the Na. All right, so question C, I would call an extended question in that you really had to know your stuff. So if you got that one wrong, it's okay. That was one of the trickier questions. Okay, but the rest of this question, you all should have been able to do quite easily. All right. Right, question 2. This table was just learning, and I cannot believe that some of you got this wrong. Okay, it's what is an electron, what is a proton, what is a neutron? What are their masses? What are their charges? Okay, this is straight from your notes. You didn't learn your notes if you got this question wrong. It's really as simple as that. Okay, an electron's mass is 0. Remember, it doesn't matter what an electron weighs because they are so tiny. Its charge is -1. The symbol for a proton is P, or you could have put P+. Its mass is 1. Its charge is +1. Okay, what does N stand for? Neutron. What is the mass of a neutron? It's 1. Remember, neutrons carry a mass. They're in the nucleus. They carry a mass. Okay, so you got 1 mark for each row. So you had to get 0 and -1 for a mark. You had to get P+ and +1 for a mark. And you have to get neutron and a mass of 1 for a mark. Okay, to get all 3. If you got this wrong, I'm sorry, you didn't study hard enough. It's really as simple as that. All right. Okay, use the information in your table to explain the following. Atoms contain charged particles, so how come they are neutral? Okay, your answer here was you have equal, it's 2 marks, so you've got to really explain. You've got equal protons and electrons in an atom, okay? Or you've got equal positive charges and negative charges in an atom. That's 1 mark, okay? So therefore, there's no charge overall, okay? Because they are equal. You have the same number of protons as you do electrons. In an atom, you all know that if I have 3 protons, I have 3 electrons, okay? So if your charges are equal, then you're going to have no overall charge. Okay, so that's your answer for that one. How come atoms can form positive ions? Okay. They can lose electrons. If you lose an electron, you become positive. So they can lose an electron, which means that's only for 1 mark. This question is 2 marks. You now have more positive than negative. Okay, so now you have a positive ion. Okay, you really had to know the structure of an atom and how ions are formed in order to answer these questions. But it's not tricky. It's just learning, making sure you understand what is an atom, what is an ion. Okay, how come atoms of the same element can have different masses? Okay, they are basically asking you about isotopes. Okay, so they can have different neutrons. Okay, that was your first mark. They can have different neutrons, but still the same number of protons. You have to have the same number of protons, otherwise you are a different element. Okay, so the same protons for your 2 marks. Different neutrons will give you the different mass. The same number of protons will mean that you are the same element. Okay. Scientists are certain that there are no undiscovered elements missing from the periodic table. Okay. How do we know that? If you go to your periodic table, which I have here, you will see that every single number is taken. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way down to 118. Every single number is taken. So that must mean that there is no other elements because there's no other numbers to fulfill, okay? These ones at the bottom here, remember these are man-made, so we just care about these ones in the big table. Okay, so your answer for that would be an element is known, an element is known for every proton number. For every proton number. Okay, so we know that there is an element from 1 to 118. All of those numbers are taken, so that must mean there's no other elements to discover. Okay, so again, this question here, question 4, was a little bit more extended. You had to think outside the box a little bit. The rest of the questions you should have been able to explain to me if you had learned well. All right, question 3. Okay, question 3 was testing, do you know how to use the periodic table? Okay, and do you know what it means if my electrons are different from my protons? So you had to look at your protons. So let's look at B. It has 11 protons. You go to your periodic table. What has 11 protons? If you look here, sodium. So your answer is sodium. Okay, it has 11 protons. To work out the number of neutrons, to work out the big number for your symbol, you say 11 plus 12. Okay, 23. Or you could have gotten that from your periodic table. If you go back to your periodic table, you can see 11. Normally there's a 23 here. Okay, your periodic table had that on it. Okay, It is not charged because I have 11 protons and I have 11 electrons. Okay, so that is correct. Okay, this one, what they've done here, this is an old question. So the proton numbers at the bottom. Our proton numbers are now at the top. If you had put it at the bottom, that's okay. You would have got the mark because you're copying what they've done. Okay. Right, so now C, 18 protons. You go to your periodic table. What has 18 protons? If you look here, it's argon, Ar. Okay, so Ar has 18 protons. You can either look at the neutrons in the periodic table or you can work it out. 18 plus 22 is 40. Is that correct? I think that's correct. Okay, 40 at the bottom. Okay, right, D, what has 15 protons? 15 protons, go to your periodic table, it is phosphorus. Okay, so phosphorus has 15 protons. You can work out its neutrons and you get 31. Okay, so you got another mark for that. But look at your protons and your electrons. You have 3 more electrons than you do protons. So this is actually 3 minus. Okay, so you get 1 mark for the symbol and you get 1 mark for the charge. You had to have 3 minus to get an extra mark there. Okay, you had to realize that you had 3 more electrons than you did protons. Okay, 13 protons up to the periodic table. 13 protons is aluminium. Aluminium, 13 protons. You can work out or find its neutrons from the periodic table as 27, 13 plus 14. But look at your electrons. There's only 10. So that means you have 3 more protons. 3 plus. Again, you get 1 mark for the aluminium. You get 1 mark for the charge to get your total of 6. Okay. This was testing. Do you know how to use the periodic table? If you got these wrong, you don't know how to use the periodic table. You need to work on that. Okay. Which atom in the table is an isotope of an atom which has 11 protons, 11 electrons, but 14 neutrons? Okay. All you had to do was find which one here has 11 protons. Okay, so it's B for 1 mark. Okay, the condition is that it has 11 protons. Or it has the same number of protons or something like that. Okay, all you had to do there was find what has 11 protons. Oh, it's element B, so that must make an isotope. Okay. So this one was a trickier question because you had to actually apply your knowledge to the periodic table, but you need to learn how do I use my periodic table. Okay. Question 4 was all just learning your bonding, ionic bonding, macromolecular and metallic bonding. This was a very simple question. And a lot of people got it wrong, and I don't know why. So, ionic bonding. You've got positive and negative ions. It does not conduct when it's solid. It does conduct as a liquid. Okay? Remember, the ions can move in a liquid, so it does conduct electricity. Okay? And you could have given any example, but NaCl, as long as you had a metal and a non-metal joined together, you would have got your answer. So you got 1 for saying yes, it conducts electricity, and you got 1 for an example. Okay. Right, macromolecular or giant molecular. Straight away, you should think, I only know 3. I only know diamond, graphite, okay, and silicon oxide. You only know 3 of them. That's not a lot to learn. So learn them. Silicon dioxide, okay? Then you need to remember that diamond and graphite are only made of carbon. Silicon dioxide is silicon and oxygen. Okay, this should all be going on in your head as you read this. So now they tell you atoms of 2 different elements. Okay, diamond, graphite, or silicon dioxide. Which one has 2 different elements? Silicon dioxide. It's got silicon and oxygen. Okay, it's not diamond and it's not graphite because those are only made of carbon, but they told you there was 2 different elements, silicon and oxygen. Okay, a mark for that. Right, metals. What makes up metals? I can't believe that you guys got this wrong. Electrons, free electrons, and positive ions. Simple. It's that picture we drew of the positives with all the electrons around it. Okay, it's made up of electrons and positive ions. Does it conduct as a liquid? Of course, metals conduct as liquids. Okay, you got 2 marks here, one for saying electrons, one for saying positive ions. Okay, you could not say negative ions. It's not negative ions. It's actually electrons floating around. Okay, negative ions, if you look up here, that's your ionic bonding. Okay, so question 4, learning these tables, reading through your bonding, making sure you understand ionic, giant molecular, metallic. What are my types? What makes up each thing? Okay. Right, question 5 was equations. Okay, some of you did well, some of you not so well, some of you okay. This one is tricky, I understand, because again, it's application of your knowledge. It's not just learning, okay? So they tell you sulfuric acid is a strong acid. Change the equations into the format that they tell you, okay? So we are going from this equation to a word equation. So you're just writing the words. Magnesium, okay, plus H2SO4. You have to learn. H2SO4 is sulfuric acid. Yes, Lucky? They're on Mama's bed. Sulfuric acid. And they even told you sulfuric acid. I don't know why people got that wrong. H2SO4 is sulfuric acid. Okay, you should have been able to do that at least. Okay, then magnesium sulfate, MgSO4. Okay, magnesium, why are you being so slow? Magnesium sulfate. Sorry if you can't read this, it's very hard. Magnesium sulfate plus hydrogen. Okay, this was only 1 mark, so you had to get everything right. Okay, excuse me while I just grab my charger. Sorry, guys. Okay, hopefully this will charge now. Why are you not charging? All right, so You had magnesium, sulfuric acid, magnesium sulfate, and hydrogen. Okay. Question 2 was a lot trickier. You had to work out your formulae of each thing. Okay. So lithium oxide is made up of lithium and oxygen. Okay. Lithium is in group 1, so it has a valency of 1. Oxygen is in group 6. It has a valency of 2. It needs 2 more electrons. Okay. You then cross those down. You get Li2O. The sulfuric acid they've given you here, H2SO4, plus you should have learned that off by heart. Okay. Lithium sulfate. Lithium, group 1. Sulfate you have to learn as SO4 and its valency is 2. So you get Li2SO4. And you get water, H2O. Okay. You had to have the formulae and it balanced. You didn't actually have to balance it, but you got a mark for it being balanced in terms of 1, 1, 1, 1. Okay, so question 2 is trickier, writing equations. Okay. Question 3, now we're getting even trickier. Change the ionic equation into a symbol equation, and they told you to use hydrochloric acid. So what you are doing here is looking for the ions and making sure you change the ions. So we've got copper oxide. That stays the same, it's not an ion. The H plus comes from an acid, and they told you to use HCl. Okay. You then have to figure out, okay, if I've got Cu2 plus here, that must have come from the salt. My salt is going to have chloride in it because I've got HCl, okay? And I get CuCl2, and then I get water. Okay, so you had to figure out you got CuCl2. Okay. We had to change this into a word equation. Okay, this is sodium. CO3 is carbonate. Sodium carbonate. Okay, what is H2SO4? Sulfuric acid. You had to learn that. Okay, sulfuric acid. Na2SO4, that should be an arrow, is sodium. Na. SO4 is sulfate. Okay, plus, I'm not going to write it, but carbon dioxide plus water. You had to write the whole thing out. Okay, changing it into a word equation you should not struggle with. Maybe question 2 and 3 was slightly trickier. Okay, here you got a mark for each formulae and you got a mark for it being balanced again. Okay. Question B, when sulfuric acid dissolves in water, the following reaction occurs. Explain why water is behaving as a base. Okay, what they're asking you here is basically what is a base? Okay, so why is the water behaving as a base? Can you see it's got H2O and then it goes to H3O? Okay, so it accepts, for 1 mark, a proton for your 2nd mark. Okay, it accepts a proton. So you had to figure out that they were asking you what is a base. A base is something that accepts a proton. Here we had H2O, we've got H3O. That means it took up an H. Okay, so it accepts 1 mark, a proton, 2nd mark. Okay. Question C. Sulfuric acid is a strong acid. Ethanoic acid is a weak acid. What is the difference? This was just rote learning. We spoke about what is a strong acid, what is a weak acid. Okay. So your answer, sulfuric acid completely ionizes. Remember, it becomes ions completely. Okay? Ionizes. 1 mark. Ethanoic acid, what makes it weak? It partially ionizes. 2nd mark. Okay, this was not hard. You should have got 2 marks for this. Very easy. What is a strong acid? What is a weak acid? A strong acid completely ionizes. A weak acid partially ionizes. Okay, so again, this was one of your trickier questions, especially working with your equations, but some things like writing it into a word equation and your definitions, you should be getting if you studied enough. Okay, those of you who are not getting these answers correct, you need to look at how are you studying? Is it working for you? Is it not working for you? Did you even study? Okay. Right, last question. Making salts. I cannot believe that you got this wrong. We had just done this. Okay. What is the salt? How do you prepare it? Simple. Okay. So, using a burette and an indicator, you should be thinking, okay, both of my acid and my base are going to be soluble. Okay. If I mix 2 solutions and I'm getting a salt by precipitation, that must mean I'm making something that is insoluble because I've got that precipitation coming out. Okay. If I add an excess of base or metal to acid and I remove the excess by filtration, that must mean that whatever you used here was insoluble. That's the prac we did. Okay. We did all of this as practicals. So you obviously were not paying attention, a lot of you. Okay, so for each of the following, choose one of the methods, name another reagent, and then write an equation. Okay, so we are making a soluble salt. So straight away, it's not B, because that is making an insoluble salt. Okay, from the insoluble base zinc oxide. Okay, how do I do that? Method C. I'm going to have to filter off this base because it's insoluble, it doesn't dissolve. Okay, the other reagent, okay, would be sulfuric acid because I need that sulfate. Okay, sulfuric acid. That's where the sulfate is coming from, sulfuric acid. Okay, so your word equation now is zinc oxide, which is your base. Okay, zinc oxide plus the sulfuric acid that you just figured out you got because I need the sulfate, and that can only come from sulfuric acid. Okay, and it gives me zinc sulfate, which is what I wanted. Okay, zinc sulfate, and I'm mixing an acid and a base, so I get water. Okay, 1 mark for each of those lines. You should have got 3 marks for that question. Okay, it's method C because I'm using an insoluble base, so I'm going to have to filter that off. It's sulfuric acid because I'm making zinc sulfate, so I need the sulfate to come from something. Okay. Question 2, the soluble salt. Okay, so again, it's not B because B makes an insoluble salt. So it must be A. Okay, Why is it A? Because my base is now soluble. Okay, if I have a soluble base, I have to do my titration method, which is using a burette and an indicator. Okay, the salt I'm making is potassium chloride. Which acid has potassium chloride? Hydrochloric acid, or HCl. Okay, you could have also written hydrochloric acid. Okay, you have to be able to figure out what acid am I using from what my salt was. Okay, so now your equation, you have to write it out. Okay, so potassium hydroxide, KOH, they told you potassium hydroxide, plus hydrochloric acid, which you would have figured out there. 2 marks. 1 mark for each of those lines. Okay. So question 3, we are only left with method B, and that's correct because it's an insoluble salt from lead iodide and lead 2 nitrate. Okay. What is your reagent? Okay. If I'm making lead iodide, I'm going to need something iodide to mix the two. Okay. So I'm going to need potassium. You could have said any iodide, potassium iodide, sodium iodide, whatever iodide. Okay. And you get 1 mark for each of those. Okay. Your equation, hold on, I just need to check what happened to your equation. I've forgotten. Because your equation, unfortunately, was written down wrong for you there. It doesn't make sense. Okay, so all you got a mark for here was writing lead 2 nitrate. So lead 2 nitrate is PbNO3, and you have to have the 2 because the lead 2 nitrate. Okay, so you got a mark if you got that right. So this was out of 3, not 4. Okay, the rest of it we ignore because this was wrong over here. Okay, so this question was slightly tricky, but you should have been able to at least get which method. You should have got 3 marks at least. Which method is made for each salt. Okay, go to your notes. This is all in your notes. We did the table. You've got those printed notes of it, and we did these as practicals. So if you didn't pay attention in your pracs, you wouldn't have got these. Okay, so that is the end of the long questions, and hopefully this has helped you to figure out where you went wrong and how to fix it and do better.